Gentlemen, good afternoon. We are only 20 minutes late, so we will try to recoup as everybody else did. And I would like myself to thank the speakers and the panelists for this section. It's been a long day today, so I don't think I'll be losing too much time in introductions, because I think everybody here is quite tired. So I think we go down to business. It's an honor for me to co-chair with Mr. Bruce Harris this section, and being him an authority in arbitration, I think we will arbitrate this session very well. And at this point, to close, I introduce the panelists. Mariella Bottiglieri, if she can make it, because she is on her way from China, so I don't know if she makes it. She's managing director Giuseppe Bottiglieri. Carlo Cameli, who is General Manager of Fratelli d'Amico Armatori, Giuseppe D'Amato, Chairman di Perseveranza SPA di Navigazione, Federico Garolla di Bard, Managing Director of Med Offshore SPA, Giuseppe Lembo, President of the ULEMAR, Compagnia di Navigazione, and Paola Mattioli, CFO of Cafima Group. Said so, I leave the floor to Mr. Bruce Harris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. And all I'm going to say is that we have an excellent panel of speakers, and the first of those is Clive Aston, who's a colleague arbitrator of mine, but also a claims consultant in London, and he will be leading off now, talking about damages when the markets come tumbling down, as they have.
But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to criticize him, because it's been 19 years since we had a conference here in Naples that he has invited Bruce Harris and I to. And if he waits another 19 years, I think it will be his daughter who will be in charge of the firm, and almost certainly we'll need wheelchair access to get up to the platform here. Now, we all know what happened when the markets came tumbling down at the end of 2008. The people out east ran for the doors, tore up the charter parties, and we've been picking up the pieces ever since. Now, when that first happened, as arbitrators in London, we had a lot of what we would call firefighting cases. These were the cases where Rule B attachments had been obtained, where there was money, and there was a desperate cash flow need for owners or disponent owners to get quick awards for largely undisputed sums of money. Well, most of those cases are now over. And what we're seeing this year start to come through are the more intellectual cases, the more perhaps interesting questions of how you calculate damages when your charter gives you back the ship 4 or 5 months or 4 or 5 years earlier. Or now, as we're seeing it, what happens when the new buildings have no charterer because the charterer has disappeared. I'm going to try and cover 4 of those cases this afternoon. Obviously, because of the time, I won't be able to go into any detailed analysis, but that often, I think, is an advantage. So let's have a starting point. 1848, the case of Robinson and Harman. The rule of common law is that where a party sustains loss by breach of contract, he is, so far as money can do it, to be placed in the same situation with respect to damages as if the contract had been performed. Fairly straightforward, you would think. You try and put the party back to make them whole and treat the situation as though financially they must end up where they would have been if the contract had been performed. Well, then in 1980, Naples helped us. the Elena D'Amico. It added another level that has become a foundation case for calculating damages. And it dealt with a situation where charter parties came to a premature end by repudiation of a time charter. And it said that where there is an available market at the time of termination, the damages will generally be assessed as the difference between the contract rate and the market rate for the balance of the charter period. That seems fairly easy and straightforward, but very often there are arguments as to whether or not there is an available market. And many people would say if you were going into the market with a Panamax at the beginning of 2009, trying to find 4 or 5 year employment, you must be mad. And that's what we've seen the courts have decided. So what we're going to look at this afternoon is 4 cases that all have little variations on the facts, and each of them perhaps would sound a note of familiarity with you. The first case was the Elbrus. This was a time charter where the vessel was redelivered 39 days early. The next employment had already been fixed for the vessel, and it was going to follow on directly after the end of the charter, except that the owners had to dry dock the vessel before they could deliver into the next charter party. Now, when the vessel was redelivered early, the owner went into the market but couldn't find any employment. So they decided to dry dock the vessel straight away and then deliver it into the next charter party, which is what they did. The result of this was that they delivered into the next charter party a few days earlier than they would have done. And in fact, the rate of hire under the next charter party was better than the original charter party. Now, the charterers were just claiming overpaid hire. They said that if you looked at the owner's financial position up until the end of the following charter party, in fact, the owner had done rather well, because he'd been able to get into the new high rate of the following charter party earlier than he would have done, and he'd actually made a profit. The owners said, no, no, no. Where there's not an available market, you only look for the period up until the end of the original charter party. And if you compared the accounts between what would have been earned until the end of the original charter period and what actually was earned with the vessel going into dry dock, the owner said he'd made a loss. The charterers succeeded before the arbitrator, who said, yes, you look at the overall position and there's no loss here. Now, the case went up to the courts on appeal, and the court said normally the owner's position would be right. But sometimes when you have to take action to mitigate your losses, that action may create a profit for you. And that profit may spill over into a later period than the original charter period. When that happens, the court said, you do have to take that later profit into account. You can't ignore it and pretend it's not there. Now here, if the charter party had been performed, it appeared that the vessel would have missed the laycan for the next charter party, and the owners would not have been able to earn the better rate under the next charter party. As it was, they made a profit, and that had to be taken into account, so they could not recover any loss by taking a short-term view. The second case is called the North Prince. It's like a battle of dinosaurs in a way. It's between Glory Wealth and North China Shipping. Here, the Glory Wealth redelivered the vessel 6 months early to a disponent owner. North China were disponent owners. The disponent owners kept employing the ship, but they ended up delivering the vessel 22 days early to the head owner. Now, the question was, because North China had redelivered the vessel to the owners 22 days early, should that be taken into account? If the charter had continued, they would have kept the vessel for the minimum period under the charter with the owners. But because they redelivered 22 days early, they made a huge savings because the charter rates were very high. The arbitrators said, no, we're not going to take any notice of those 22 days that North China saved. We're going to calculate the loss purely on the basis of the difference between the market rate and the charter rate for the balance of the charter period. Now, this case as well went on appeal to the courts, and the courts agreed. They said there was no connection between the breach of the charter party and the early redelivery of the vessel to the owner by North China. In the first case, the mitigation had created a profit. Here, however, the fact that North China decided for their own commercial reasons to deliver the vessel to the head owner early was nothing to do with the breach. It was an independent commercial decision they'd made, and they were entitled to the benefit of that. Okay. Case number 3, Zodiac against Fortescue Metals. Zodiac had a 5-year consecutive voyage charter with Fortescue. Fortescue repudiated the contract with 4.5 years still to run. Zodiac claimed $105 million. 3 questions came up here. Was there an available market in 2009 for a 4-year consecutive voyage charter? Was there an available market at a later date, and was it relevant? And what discount should be given for accelerated receipt of damages? The court found there was no available market for a 4-year duration in January 2009. The fact that a year after the contract came to an end, a period market appeared should be ignored. The fact that in the middle of the damages period, the market change is irrelevant. One only looks at the date of the breach to see if there is an available market. And interestingly, a 3% discount for accelerated receipt would be allowed. I'll very quickly do the 4th one. This was a case where charterers repudiated the charter. The market rate at the time was higher, so there was no loss to the owner. But he'd incurred a lot of money in arranging for cranes to be installed on his ship to perform the charter. Although he'd made no loss, could he recover the cost of repairing or installing cranes? The answer, in short, was no. He couldn't recover the cost of installing the cranes because one had to look at the overall financial position. And the cost of installing the cranes was outweighed by the profit he made on the following substitute charter. A bit of a gallop through, but 4 cases that illustrate the different permutations that you can see in cases of early redelivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clive.